I buried a $2 PVC tube in my vegetable bed. 24 hours later, I pulled it out. The bottom was crawling with earthworms. Not 2 or 3, dozens. They threaded through the drilled holes, pulling material downward, already transforming what I had placed inside into something that retails for $15 to $30 a bag at the garden center. I did not buy these worms. I did not import them. They were already living in the soil beneath my feet, and the tube had drawn them in overnight like a magnet. Within 2 weeks, the soil in a 3-foot radius around that tube became darker, looser, visibly alive. No fertilizer, no compost bin, no tilling, just a pipe in the ground and a recipe inside it that worms cannot resist. But here is the part that should genuinely make you pause. What those worms were producing in that soil is not just fertilizer. Peer-reviewed studies reveal it contains actual plant growth hormones, auxins, gibberellins, and cytokinins, the very chemical signals that control root growth, flowering, and fruit production in every plant on Earth. Worm castings are not compost. They are a slow-release hormone delivery system, and you can manufacture them underground for the cost of a coffee. Over the next several minutes, you will discover 3 buried techniques that turn dead dirt into living soil. You will learn the secret recipe that makes worms swarm a tube overnight, instead of taking weeks, and understand exactly why each ingredient works at a biological level. A method passed down from families in Sotheby, Florida, who harvest 3,000 worms each morning using nothing more than a wooden stake and a strip of metal, and the 3-layer system that combines it all into a self-compounding process rather than a depleting one. This is the most effective soil hack mainstream gardening has never taught. The story begins with the most famous scientist in history on his knees, playing a bassoon to a pot of worms. Charles Darwin is known for evolution, but what few people realize is that the last book he wrote, 6 months before his death in 1881, had nothing to do with finches or fossils. It was about earthworms. He studied them for 40 years, testing every possible stimulus. He played a tin whistle, a piano, even a bassoon beside them. Nothing happened. But when he placed the pot directly on top of a piano and struck a single key, every worm recoiled instantly. They do not hear. They feel vibrations through solid material. Darwin observed which leaves they preferred by laying out buffets of different species. He measured how fast a stone sank into the ground by tracking the soil worms deposited on top of it, a process he continued for 29 years. His final scientific sentence was simple but profound. There are few animals which have played so important a part in the history of the world as the earthworm. While colleagues laughed at him for studying worms, the public made it his bestseller. A single earthworm consumes its own body weight in organic matter every day. 1 acre of healthy soil can harbor over 1 million of them. The United States Department of Agriculture confirmed that earthworm populations can process 20 to 40 tons of soil per acre per year. They create over 800,000 tiny water channels per acre, and soils with healthy worm populations drain 10 times faster than soils without. But the real secret lies not in what goes into a worm, but what emerges on the other side. Earthworm castings are extraordinary. When organic matter passes through a worm's digestive tract, it encounters a gut environment containing roughly 1,000 times more microbial life than the food the worm ate. The food is broken down, recombined, inoculated with beneficial bacteria and fungi, and excreted as small dark pellets. Those pellets contain 5 times more nitrogen than surrounding soil, 7 times more phosphorus, 11 times more potassium. They also contain iron, calcium, sulfur, zinc, and humic acid, the carbon-rich compound that separates dead dirt from living soil. Beyond nutrients, these castings carry growth hormones that synthetic fertilizers cannot replicate. The chemical magic inside earthworm castings transforms them from mere soil amendments into a biological powerhouse. In 1988, Italian researchers published a landmark study in the journal Biology and Fertility of Soils. They discovered that earthworm castings contain actual plant growth hormones, auxins that drive root elongation, gibberellins that trigger stem growth, cytokinins that control cell division and flowering. These hormones are not produced by the worms themselves. They are manufactured by the microbial community inside the worm's gut and chemically bonded to the humic acids in the castings. A follow-up study in 2000 by Brazilian researchers confirmed this finding. They isolated humic acids from earthworm castings and applied them to maize roots. The roots grew longer, branched more aggressively, and the cellular pumps that pull nutrients from soil into the plant worked measurably harder. A 25-year trial at Rothamsted Research Station in England tested earthworm castings against commercial potting mixes and standard compost across 25 different crops. Each and every time, earthworm castings outperformed the alternatives. Each pellet is a time-release hormone capsule coated in a mucous membrane that dissolves slowly when water touches it. Nutrients and growth signals are delivered directly to the root zone over weeks, rather than flooding and leaching away like synthetic fertilizers. This is the very material your $2 tube generates for free. Here is the practical reality. Worm castings retail for $15 to $30 for a small 5-liter bag at garden centers. If you grow tomatoes in a 4x8 raised bed, the standard recommendation is to top dress with castings 3 to 4 times per season. At retail, that costs $60 to $120 per bed per year. If you have 3 beds, that runs $200 to $300 a season, and that is just for castings. Most gardeners spend another $100 or more on synthetic fertilizers, pest treatments, and soil conditioners, all of which deplete in a single application and must be repurchased next spring. Compare that to a $2 pipe generating the same biological material continuously, deposited directly in the root zone by the worms themselves, free forever. This is not a minor savings. This is a permanent exit from the purchasing cycle. Red wigglers double their population every 60 to 90 days. Each worm produces a cocoon containing 2 to 20 babies. A baby earthworm can push 500 times its own body weight through soil. The castings they produce attract more microbial life, which draws in more worms, which produce more castings. It is a positive feedback loop that compounds rather than depletes. One installation, no subscription, no recurring cost. Darwin spent 40 years observing worms. Colleagues mocked him, yet his worm book outsold his masterpiece. Every productive agricultural civilization in human history, from the Fertile Crescent to the river deltas of Asia and the Midwest before the plow, was built on biology that worked for free. The 20th century replaced that biology with chemistry. It worked temporarily, spectacularly, and expensively, but soil remembers. Give it organic matter, moisture, and a reason for worms to stay, and it remembers fast. The charcoal you buried will still be working in 100 years. The worms will still be breeding. The tube will still be converting your banana peels into castings worth $15 a bag every single day for the rest of your gardening life. No subscription, no invoice, no return trip to the store, just biology, quietly, invisibly, and for free. An acre of healthy soil with a thriving earthworm population contains more living organisms than there are humans on Earth. This network of life took 300 million years to evolve. It runs on kitchen scraps and rainwater. It asks for nothing but to be left alone with organic matter in the dark. The $2 tube is not the technology. The worms are the technology. The tube is simply the door you leave open. Here is exactly how to turn that $2 tube into a self-sustaining biological engine. Method 1, the buried tube. You need a piece of rigid pipe, 4 to 6 inches in diameter, about 30 inches long. Use rigid white schedule. 40 PVC, unplasticized, free of phthalates, and rated food safe by the Food and Drug Administration and the National Sanitation Foundation. High-density polyethylene, the material used in milk jugs and food storage containers, is ideal. Never use flexible vinyl or any pipe that previously held chemicals, as these can leach toxins into your soil. Drill 1/4 inch holes every 2 inches across the bottom 18 inches of the pipe. The more holes, the more entry and exit points, the more worm traffic, and the wider the distribution of castings through your bed. Cover the entire lower section in a scattered pattern and leave the top 12 inches solid. This solid section remains above the soil line as your feeding port. The bottom of the pipe can be left open for worms to enter from below and allow liquid from decomposing material to drain naturally, carrying soluble nutrients with it. You can also loosely cap it with landscape fabric to prevent debris from clogging the base while still allowing worm passage. Dig a hole about 18 inches deep, placing the bottom of your chamber where soil moisture is most consistent and worm activity is highest, typically 10 to 16 inches down depending on your climate. Drop the tube and drilled end down and backfill so only the top portion remains above ground. Position it near the center of your bed to maximize the radius of influence, so worms traveling outward pass through the root zones of as many plants as possible before depositing castings. Cap loosely with an inverted flower pot to block rain and flies while allowing airflow. What you put inside the tube is critical. Raw kitchen scraps alone are slow. Worms do not eat food. They eat the fungi and bacteria that colonize decomposing food. Your first load must be pre-rotted. Banana peels, melon rind, coffee grounds, crushed eggshells, combined with a handful of damp shredded cardboard for 3 to 5 days until it smells earthy and feels soft. Layer 4 inches of this pre-rotted mix into the bottom. Cover with a thick layer of used coffee grounds and on top pack damp shredded cardboard or newspaper. This holds moisture, blocks light, and provides bedding for the worms to pull into their burrows. Avoid meat, fish, dairy, oily, or heavily seasoned cooked foods. Large quantities of citrus, and anything sprayed with pesticides or herbicides, as these can disrupt microbial balance or repel worms. The second technique comes from Sophie, Florida, where families have harvested thousands of worms in a morning for generations, using a method called worm grunting. A wooden stake is driven into the ground, and a flat strip of metal is rubbed across the top. The vibration travels through the soil, and worms pour out, fleeing what they interpret as a mole attack. Earthworms are exquisitely sensitive to vibrations and chemical signals. When your tube is loaded with pre-rotted bait, microbial activity produces constant chemical signals that diffuse outward. The pipe becomes a beacon, distributing fertility across your entire bed through the natural movement of the worms themselves. The third layer completes the system: hardwood lump charcoal, crushed to gravel size. Line the bottom 2 inches of the hole with this charcoal before installing your tube. Charcoal's honeycomb-like pores provide permanent housing for beneficial bacteria and fungi. Soak the charcoal in compost tea, diluted fish emulsion, or 1 part urine to 10 parts water for 48 hours before burial. This charges the charcoal with nutrients and microbes. The charcoal anchors nutrients in castings, preventing them from washing away in rain. Backfill around your tube with a 50-50 mix of native soil and aged compost. Load the tube with pre-rotted scraps, coffee grounds, and damp cardboard. Surround it with a thick ring of straw or leaf mulch in a 3-foot radius. This keeps soil cool and moist, draws deep burrowing earthworms into the root zone, and creates a second feeding zone. Carbon enters from 2 directions. Castings accumulate from both pathways. The charcoal beneath holds everything in place. 1 or 2 tubes per 36 square feet of bed is sufficient. For larger gardens, space them 6 feet apart. Rotate inputs weekly, varying fruit and vegetable scraps, coffee and eggshells, soaked cardboard, and aged manure. Every 3 to 4 months, stop feeding for 2 weeks to allow worms to finish processing. Month by month, you will see results. In month 1, pre-rotted scraps break down further, microbial activity spikes, and worms begin entering through the holes. Month 2, soil around the tube darkens visibly within a 1-foot radius, and the worm population multiplies inside. Month 3, castings become visible inside the chamber and on the soil surface nearby. Roots of nearby plants redirect toward the enriched zone. By month 6, a 3 to 4 foot radius around the tube is noticeably darker, softer, and retains moisture longer. By month 12, the charcoal layer is fully colonized, worm populations have doubled multiple times, and your underground biological engine is self-sustaining, requiring only your kitchen scraps to continue producing castings indefinitely. Failures have simple fixes. If the lid smells rotten instead of earthy, stop adding scraps for a week and add dry, shredded cardboard or leaves to rebalance the carbon to nitrogen ratio. If waterlogged, poke extra drainage holes and add dry carbon material. If you see tiny white flies, cover scraps inside the tube with damp newspaper or cardboard. Worms will eat it. Every problem has a biological cause and a straightforward solution. Worms that leave during quiet periods will return when feeding resumes. To jumpstart the tube or assess worm populations, use the mustard extraction method. Mix 20 grams of hot mustard powder into 2 liters of water and pour over a marked square foot of soil. Within minutes, worms surface, fleeing irritation through their breathing pores. Rinse and place them directly into the tube. You will know the system works when 3 things happen. Dark, crumbly castings accumulate inside the chamber, the soil around the tube darkens and becomes crumbly, and the plants closest to the tube outpace all others in your garden. This $2 tube, properly installed and fed, becomes a self-replicating, permanent source of fertility. Castings attract microbial life, which draws more worms, producing more castings, a positive feedback loop that compounds rather than depletes. 1 installation, no subscription, no recurring cost. Soil remembers its biology. Charcoal and worms will continue to function for decades. Your banana peels are transformed into castings worth $15 a bag every single day for the rest of your gardening life. The tube is simply a door. The worms are the technology.